China and the Ukrainian conflict. Visiting China for the first time since the epidemic to discuss the war in Ukraine and its impact on the New World Order, there is a feeling that the country is at war, both on the ground and in business. A few days ago, at the invitation of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, a German foundation affiliated with the Socialist Party of Germany, SPD, I had the opportunity to be the first group of European experts to visit China since the new century. Member of. Infections are common. The purpose of the trip is to meet face-to-face with Chinese experts to discuss the war in Ukraine and its impact on EU-China relations. Shanghai was chosen because, in the current context, it is a city that has more freedom to discuss this issue than Beijing. We had several days of intense discussions with Chinese scholars and members of the intellectual community. Initially, for European experts now explained China in an important tone how we view the relationship between the two sides. For example, Tuomai said China should open up to the outside world, then, in the presence of the professor. The Department of International Relations replied, "You see, the talks with Western experts or representatives before the epidemic always followed the same pattern. You come here to criticize and complain about China, and we have to defend our country. Listen to me. You don't see the change, but dynamic backfires. You can't change China, and we can't change Europe. We all have many internal problems to deal with. No doubt, but why don't we take this opportunity to get to know each other better and see where we can collaborate?" This intervention changed the mood of the discussion and may have helped us to have a more flexible exchange of ideas. We did our best to explain Europe's position, and they did the same to explain China's position. Below, I will try to complete the Chinese worldview. First, the Chinese, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, which is reflected in our exchange, refuse to accept the main idea that the world today can be divided into countries that love Russia and those that do not. To them, this seems to be a dual view, reflecting the fact that Europe is struggling to adapt to a multipolar world. More than 140 countries have not condemned Russia for various reasons, but that does not mean they have agreed to invade Ukraine. For example, China denies Russia's annexation of Crimea, and the 12 conflict points begin with the sentence, "The sovereignty of all countries must be respected." For us Chinese people, this is a condemnation of the occupation and a direct criticism of Russia. They said, "This is Chinese style, not European style, but punishment." Our answer, of course, is to ask why it has a general definition of sovereignty of all countries, instead of the specific Ukrainian sovereignty, to which China responds as follows. Relations with Russia, our good neighbor in the north, are never easy, so it is important for China to cooperate with Russia. They explained that the U.S. policy of including China has brought the two countries closer, but they also noted that the joint declaration of February 4, 2022 against Russia coincided with the opening of competing relations in the Beijing winter just a few weeks ago. Said Ukraine. It is a mistake that Sino-Russian cooperation knows no borders. Obviously, this partnership has its limits, and Beijing has some reservations about signing this term, which has become a hammer that many in the West use to share with Russia and China. A Chinese official said the announcement was aimed at the United States, but China did not know it would have a negative impact on China-EU relations. One of the members made a statement just weeks before the intervention, saying that China is feeling the influence of Russian diplomacy. China, as Russia's friend, is causing conflict in China. Most, think some support is acceptable. Against the isolationist policy of the USA, China needs a partner like Russia. Another professor said, another way was once against the action of the global evil, as was done after the attack on the Twin Towers, where China joined the West to stop Russia. But if Beijing does this, will the US stop seeing China as a strategic threat? Will sanctions against China be lifted? The opinion of Chinese analysts is that it will not. It therefore decided to approach the situation on the basis of two principles: respect for the freedom violated in Ukraine, and respect for the perceived security of all countries under threat when it comes to Russia. Yes, China generally believes that NATO has expanded to account for Ukraine's influence, but this view has been challenged in Europe. But voices supporting Russia in China are wrong. They see Russia as a burden to China rather than a commodity, and they openly state this. Less controversial is the recognition that conflict with the United States is inevitable. Whoever the president is, many have given up hope of engaging with the White House. From the perspective of the commercial city Shanghai, the voices criticizing Beijing are endless and very effective. Traditionally, the United States has been used as a point of reference, so the elite who send their children to study in the United States are divided into three perspectives. Many people, those who were able to emigrate, entered the United States and other more liberal countries. Disappointed with opposition to China in the US, others have become popular and support the government. The US is not the norm, while others criticize Xi Jinping's policies and simply remain silent. This has led to a less strong democracy and less influence in China, which is a tragedy in itself. Many Chinese participants admitted in private conversations that the country is going through a difficult time. The housing bubble has burst, imports and exports have slowed, investments are not returning once, and domestic consumption has not held up as expected even after infection prevention was tightened and opened up. As a result, youth unemployment is around 20%, which is a major concern. People, including these interviewees, believe that the government must withdraw from the economy in order to reinflate the market, but they also know that it is not easy to pull the government out of business in the current outside context. Loosen political control. The exact opposite. A journalist from a major European newspaper said that there are rumors that the government will launch military action. In fact, the law exists in theory but not legally because there are enough volunteers. These expectations and customer trust and expectations always make them very unhappy. Faced with this reality, with the USA being seen as a hostile environment, Beijing has no choice but to try not to lose Europe and to increase its relations with neighboring countries for the Southern Hemisphere. There is great concern in China that the new economic vision is starting to take hold in Europe as well as in the United States. The European Commission's latest security policy is a new example of this model. Unfortunately, the Investment Agreement 2020 has not yet been ratified due to the relationship and China's desire to grow as a competitor. One German political expert was surprised to find that today there is almost more discussion about China in Germany and the Netherlands than there is in Ukraine. Attitudes towards the Asian giant have been tough on almost all sides, and the German government has yet to reveal its own Chinese strategy. Ukraine's relations with Taiwan were immediately denied, and it was said that the EU's relations with China, €850 billion in trade in 2022, would not be affected by the war in Ukraine. From China's perspective, the conflict will most likely have the same consequences as the partition of South Korea, prompting the EU to make a commitment to peace to avoid the light issue for a long time. But now it's hard to see what's going on. Indonesia's proposal for a ceasefire and demilitarized zone at the Shanghai conference while we were in Shanghai was welcomed by the Chinese attendees, but quickly rejected by Kyiv and European cities. The Ukrainian counteroffensive is starting and it is not yet clear how far it can go. But in any case, China's values will remain regardless of the outcome of the conflict. If Russia is finally defeated, will China participate in the rebuilding of Ukraine? The US might say no, but does the EU know the cost of the bill by doing the same? Or will China participate in the rebuilding of the Russian side and start a new war, if there is a North Korean-style disintegration? Or will it involve building on both sides? So far, Kyiv has not brought much criticism to China. Zelensky doesn't seem to want to see China as the only competitor. Many other Europeans took the same position.